Going live here, one in the waiting room. Going live here, one in. All right, welcome everyone out there in YouTube land. Just gonna give everyone a second here to connect to audio. Happy to have you. All right, well, looks like everybody's set. Welcome everyone. This is our Pragmatic Institute office hours. These are chats that we do weekly, every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern with a different Pragmatic instructor. So my name is Callie Frisbee. I am the Community Engagement Strategist here at Pragmatic Institute, and I am your host for today. We want to welcome product expert and Pragmatic Institute, Clark Smith. Hey, Clark, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Callie, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. I just see Perry jumped on. Hey there, Perry, happy to have you. And before we dive in, we definitely want to do a quick shout out to our PAC. This is the Pragmatic alumni community. So proud of this community and all it's accomplished. We actually have Rachel on today, who is one of our fearless leaders of the PAC, and happy to announce we have now hit over 5,000 members. So chock full of really like-minded peers, exclusive events, a huge curated library of resources. So, really no matter what you're after, there's certainly something there for you. So, and now we moved on to no matter how you train with us, you will get a lifetime membership. So whether you do virtual instructor-led, on demand, that is a resource that you will have lifetime access to. You can check out more information on that at pragmaticinstitute.com/community. So we'll dig in. I know what we've had questions that have been submitted prior to. We always want to hear from folks on the call, and we are actually doing our special promotion where the best live question that gets asked will win lunch to their favorite restaurant on us. So Clark, you will be the decider at the end. No rhyme or reason, whatever calls to you. So if you're out there in YouTube land, feel free to hop in, ask that live question for a chance to win lunch. In the meantime, we've had some submissions prior to, so I will go ahead and toss the first one your way, Clark. Here's one that comes from Tiffany, who says, I recently took training and got a lot of clarity with regards to the difference between a product roadmap versus a product release plan. Do you have any templates or best practices that you would offer that are best to use when actually having to present your roadmap to a board of directors or higher ups?
Yeah, really good question. And there's a couple of things I would recommend. The first one, Callie mentioned it already. There are a bunch of different roadmap templates available on the PAC site. So take a look at those. But particularly if you're talking about board of directors or higher ups, what I would tell you is keep them high level. So try to make sure that you focus on kind of big picture things that you're trying to accomplish, because typically board of directors and higher ups, they are not going to care about a lot of individual details. They want to see some sense of vision. They want to see where you're headed. And that's really the role that roadmaps are designed to play. But I'll give you a specific example from my own background. We had really detailed roadmaps that we used as a team to manage what we were doing. But the version that we showed to our board typically only showed 3 high-level elements for each key kind of upcoming quarter to help them understand what are the big problems that we're focused on 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the road. We didn't get into any detail as to how we were going to solve those problems. It was all about what's the big picture problem that we're trying to solve. And so there are some good examples that I know there's at least 2 roadmap templates that are specifically designed for those kind of higher level conversations available on the PAC. But I would tell you just to think really high level. What are the big things you're trying to do? Give them a sense of your vision, because they typically don't need a lot of detail.
Great. Yeah, and I noticed we have Kim back, we have Lanka. Hi, Jeff, welcome. Welcome, guys, happy to have you. And just so everybody knows, we are running a campaign, Best Live Question Wins Lunch on Us. So feel free to toss those into the chat. You can send them to me privately, but we certainly want to hear from you. So Clark, I have this next one coming from Phil. Phil says, we're getting a lot of feature requests from our customers and many seem equally urgent and pervasive. How should we be ranking these further so that we can form our appropriate plan of attack?
Yeah, really good question. And Phil, one of the things I don't know, which courses you've taken, but I'll give you a little bit of background on how we did this. In Foundations, we talk about the fact that once you've gone through that initial screening of, is this urgent, pervasive, is someone willing to pay us to solve it? That becomes an opportunity. But then you have to think about, how do we rank these different opportunities? And so what we did at the company where I came from and applied the Pragmatic framework was, we identified 5 kind of key priorities, and every single one of those kind of new requests went through that kind of scoring. I mean, we gave them a 0 to 5 score for each of those 5 different priorities. Now, that's not going to solve your problem completely, because what you're going to end up with is probably a big list of good ones that are all going to be in that 17, 18, 19 range. At least that's what we had. Again, any new feature request, we had ended up with a score somewhere between 0 and 25. And then it helped us filter out the lousy ones. And then we would go in and actually look at the individual ones and try to figure out, what was this particular feature request going to deliver? Was it something that was going to really deliver big on customer impact? Was it something that was going to deliver on a key long-term strategic vision that we had? Or was this something, that we had to do because of something the competition was doing? And so figure out, what are the kind of key attributes that are really important to you. It's also something where you want to think about, how do we bring more market evidence into that conversation? So start tracking those requests. If you start to hear those requests coming from 2, 3, 4 of your customers, that's also something you want to try to factor in. So again, think about, how could you start to consistently evaluate those different requests based on what's most important to you and to your customers, so that you have some way of more objectively prioritizing them. And again, it's not always going to tell you which things you should do next, but it's going to at least help you eliminate the ones that are relatively low impact. It's going to help you figure out which ones cluster together in kind of those high impact areas. And then you can go in and look at them individually to decide, okay, we've got a lot of different things we could do, but of these, 10 things that we could go do right now, which one's going to have the biggest impact on our customers as a whole?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like what you said about, it might be a feature that our competition is doing. I mean, I feel like we get so many questions surrounding competitive analysis as a whole. I mean, do you maybe have any tips or tricks, or maybe some of those stronger areas that you think people should focus on when looking into competitive analysis?
Yeah, really good question, Callie. So when you get into the whole competitive space, there's a couple of different dynamics that come into play there. So one is something that we can do to differentiate ourselves from the competition, but there are sometimes things that we have to do to keep up with the competition, or things that are going to put our customers at risk if we don't do them. And so think about competitive having multiple layers to it, because it's often not just things that we want to do because they're going to differentiate us. Sometimes there are things that we don't have. And so you have to really drill into, why does this matter from a competitive perspective? And so use that as a way to think about that, even if that means you have to come up with kind of multiple layers of competitive analysis. Because oftentimes we don't want to just do the same thing the competition is doing. If we're just doing that, what we're basically doing is outsourcing our strategy to the competition. But sometimes they do things and we have to respond. Other times we're going to find things that if we go do this, it allows us to differentiate ourselves in a meaningful way. And so you want to think about what is it from a competitive perspective that's really important to us. Is it differentiation? Is it keeping up? Is it making sure that we don't put our current customers at risk because of something that we are lacking that the competition already has?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I actually got got a question for you here, Clark, from Jeff, who's on the call. I'll read it, and then Jeff, maybe you want to pop off and
Hey, Jeff.
further clarify. But Jeff says, I'm working on introducing Pragmatic to my company. We have a backlog of existing NPD ideas that are not creating, that were not created using pragmatic principles, and are having an internal discussion on whether to rate those ideas against pragmatic principles versus identifying new market problems in a pragmatic way. That's a good question. There are strong believers in both opinions. Do you have a perspective on which might be more effective in the long term? Great question.
I think, Jeff, when we rolled out the pragmatic framework, we had a backlog of about 400 items total. So I've lived through the same pain that you're feeling. Let me just tell you what we did. So we took that, and it took a little bit of time, but we didn't want to just assume that everything that we had done in the past was wrong, that we would just, think about stuff going forward. Honestly, I think the thing that was the most painful was trying to go through that backlog and figure out, where did this come from? Who was the person who submitted this request? Was this a client request? Was this something that somebody just thought was a great idea in a meeting? When did this even come in? And so we spent a while just going back and pulling all of that information to figure out, how long has this request been sitting in Jira? Who submitted it? Why did they submit it? And honestly, we found some things where it's like the person was no longer with the company. They had been gone for 6 months. We couldn't figure it out. So those were the first ones we just kind of threw out, because it's like, okay, we can't go back and add any more information to this because we don't have the client anymore. We don't have the person who submitted it's gone. It's 3 years ago on a product release that we don't even support anymore. We went through all of that stuff. And I think of that list of 400, we were able, by just going through that process, to trim that list to about 100 things. And then we had to go through a little bit of another painful process of trying to group them together, of figuring out where are there some things here that are consistent. And so it took a couple of months, not full-time working on it because we had other jobs, but to kind of clean all of that up. But then we did actually put all of those, at least big picture problems, into our ongoing backlog. And one of the challenges we had was kind of pre-pragmatic. A lot of those were individual feature requests where somebody that said, like, hey, move the button from here to here. And so those were the things that some of them we went back and said, okay, is there really something else going on here? Or was this just a request to move the button from here to here? But we ended up with a parking lot of things that we then kind of ran through the pragmatic filters to see, is this really something that we should do? Is there really a problem here? Or is this just a feature request? And can we get beyond that feature request to understand what was happening? So I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think we'd be hard pressed to say, hey, everything that came before this we're going to throw out the window because it wasn't pragmatic. There are definitely, and I think, a lot of them, we'll look at them and say, hey, is there actually it'll be an easy process. We'll look at them and say, hey, is there a problem that we're trying to solve here? And no, and then move on to the next thing. But yeah, there's people who are really excited about the whole idea of market problems and getting out into the field. But I just think we have to chew through. We can't discount the what's come before. That's probably not a good.
I think you're right, but I suspect as you get into it, it won't be that hard to at least get rid of the ones that simply are, hey, add this field to a report, move this button. That's the kind of stuff that you can probably pretty quickly figure out, is there something more to this, or is this just somebody who didn't like the way the reporting, the report was generated, and we can set that aside and look for some bigger picture problems.
Nice. Well, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for the question. Well, Jeff's in the lead for best live question now. So if anyone wants to toss any in, feel free to send them my way, to me privately, to the group as a whole. In the meantime, Clark, I have two for you that I think I'm going to read them, and maybe I feel like the answers will be similar. They're both kind of work questions. So this first one comes from Claire, who says, I have under a year of experience as a PM and was laid off because of the pandemic. While I'm saddened, I'm taking this as an opportunity to improve personally and professionally. She's taken foundations, but is looking for additional ways that she can work harder now in between jobs to position herself for success when things bounce back. And then let me toss this other one in here from Sydney, who says she was also recently let go of a job due to COVID and was wondering if there are any suggestions or areas to explore for a product manager who might be interested in doing freelance work.
So it's tough, and there's been a ton of this kind of disruption over the last year. So that's actually one of the reasons why the pack exists the way it does today. And so I would actually start there. Again, if you're not familiar with what we've done, we've really added a ton of new capabilities to the alumni community, including lots of different groups, and really the ability to interact with other people who have been through pragmatic training, who use this approach in the way they run their products. And so there's a couple things I'd recommend you do. First of all, if you took foundations a while ago and weren't paying that close of attention in the class in terms of how do I actually access the pack, send an email to community@pragmaticinstitute.com. Give them your information from when you took the course. They will help you get your password reset, get your access restored if you don't have it because you were using your work email and you don't have access to that anymore. On that alumni community, there are two really helpful message boards. There is actually a job board. So, if you want to go look and see if there are openings available today, go check those out. There is also a career development board that's got lots of stuff. I actually saw a posting on there from yesterday or the day before. So I would start there. Because if you're actively looking for a job, there's stuff happening there. The second thing I would think about, again, there's a ton of disruption happening right now. So if I were you, I would be thinking about and just researching even through Google, who are the companies that are rethinking their staffing right now? Who are the people who are saying, you know what, we're going to look for an ongoing way to support people working remotely? Because depending on where you are, we're kind of living through this time where you're going to have a whole lot of new job opportunities as companies decide that they don't need to have everybody in the office all the time. And so I'd start looking to see who are the people who are rethinking their hiring and the way they do things so that you can start figuring out how do I connect with people from those companies, people who have now realized that they can do things remotely that they could never do before. And then the third thing I would recommend is find some different resources that you just really like that you can use as ways to stay up with what's going on. There's tons of them. There are a couple that I love. There's a daily newsletter that I get called Marketing Brew. There's also got a Product Brew and I think a Tech Brew version of their newsletters. You can get up to 3 newsletters a day from them. And they talk about everything from just what's happening in the technology world, different companies. They link to all kinds of different articles. It's a great way to just keep current on what's happening at different companies. There's also tons of great podcasts. There's one that I always recommend to people other than, of course, our Pragmatic podcast, which is awesome. But if you're interested really in technology companies, check out the Private Equity Fundcast. It is another great podcast run by a couple of guys who manage a private equity firm. All their companies are tech companies, and they're talking tons about what their technology companies are dealing with. What are the kinds of changes that they see happening? How are they making decisions across their portfolio of technology companies? So those are all good resources. And I think the hardest thing if you're not actively working right now is not so much that the pragmatic framework is going to change dramatically. It's just, how do you stay current so that when you go into interview, you know what's happening out there? You can be conversant. And so, again, I think the alumni community, one of the best things about the changes we've made is that now you have the ability not just to find the tools and templates from our courses, but you can actually interact with other people. Yeah, Kim, I will find those while we keep going here. Callie, go ahead. I can multitask.
Well, no, it's so funny that you're talking about the job board too, because, you know, I just was recently have a conversation about that. There was like a good handful of people that found jobs directly off of that packed job board. So to your point, I think it's a really good resource that maybe a lot of people don't know about. And just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, Clark, with what I'm so impressed with the community. I mean, obviously we're at 5,000 members, but just how willing people are to share their knowledge, share their resources, share their personal use cases. So there's just, it's so robust. So even to just go in there, I mean, I get lost, right, in these conversation threads. Everyone's so willing to go above and beyond.
Yeah, and the great thing about that is everybody who's on there has taken at least one Pragmatic course. So they're from companies who are using, you know, the framework and the things that we do. And so hopefully they're probably predisposed to be looking for people who have been through, who have at least taken foundations. And so I think that's part of what makes it such a great resource is when they're looking for somebody, they want to find somebody, you know, who at least already knows the shorthand, because it's one less thing they have to learn as a new team member.
Yeah. Or even, you know, to Jeff's point, like he's trying to push, you know, the ideology, especially when, you know, there's not as many like-minded people in your organization. It can be harder, but, you know, PAC's another great resource to get some tips for that as well. So great. And looks like Kim Clark put those in the chat for you. So feel free to.
You actually earn stuff for recommending people to sign up for Marketing Bro. I wish I knew what what my referral code was. I've never referred anybody else to it before. So, but eventually you get stickers, and stickers are super important to me. So oh well.
I can wait till you find that referral link and click on that one instead.
It would take me way too long, but thanks. All right, Callie, what's next?
All right, Clark, next we have Kaylee. Kaylee says, we are a company that relies heavily on our customer support, and I recently realized how valuable that could be for our product team with regards to insights and pain points that our customers endure. What do you think would be the best way to go about trying to connect the two, and are there any toes I should worry about potentially stepping on in the process?
Yeah. That's awesome, actually. And I think you're absolutely right, Kaylee. That can be an incredible resource. And so there's a couple of different ways that I've leveraged that and that I would encourage you to think about how you can use that. You don't say quite how much volume you have there. So I'm going to give you a couple of different things to think about. But those customer support interactions can be an incredibly valuable way of both understanding who your users are, to make sure that everybody in the company understands who your users are. And you can also start to use them as a way to identify market problems. And so a couple of things that we did that were really, really powerful. First of all, we actually started having a pretty large group of people from our teams listen in on those support calls, because it gave lots of people context that they didn't have. We had our engineers just pick an hour a month and just sit with one of our support people and listen in on the calls, because it helped them really get a feeling for who our users were and what the things were that they were struggling with. I still remember a phone call that completely changed the way our teams thought about who our users were. The company that I came from, where I implemented the Pragmatic methodology, was a company that built a distributed marketing management platform that was used by franchise dealer distributors who worked with big brands. And I think everybody sort of had this idea that our users were these sophisticated full-time marketing people. And one day, one of our developers was listening in on a support call. The support person was actually returning a call from the night before, and called this local dealer who said, "Hey, I can't take your call right now. I am up on a roof installing a satellite dish. Can I call you back in 30 minutes? And I remember this light going off for our developer, who was under this assumption that the people who used our platform were marketing people sitting in an office thinking about marketing all day. And when it dawned on him that these were people who were running an insurance agency, who were installing satellite dishes, who were going out and providing tech support, it started to change the way they thought about who the users of our solution were. And it gave them that understanding to realize these weren't people who were sitting around thinking about marketing all day. These are people who were running a small business. So that's the first thing that we did. The second thing we started doing was looking at some ways that we could tag those support requests so that we could start to see, and this is where you might step on some toes. And so this is one of the things to think about is there a way that you can come up with a simple way to start to tag support requests when they start to hear a common theme? When they start to hear consistent feedback of, I'm having a hard time accessing this part of the system. I'm having a hard time completing this task. You do not want to make life harder for your support people. You don't want to make it more difficult for them to complete a support call. But in whatever support system you're using, is there a way that they can have a drop down that they can choose from, or some other way to tag common themes or common types of calls that start to come in? Because that's really valuable information. If you can start to look at your support calls and start to realize that 17% of our support calls are coming from people who are having a hard time completing this particular task, or who, couldn't figure out how to run a particular report, or couldn't figure out how to see their account history, that's going to start to help you zero in on some of those market problems that you might want to really think about. How do we solve that? Because we're starting to hear this, we're starting to see real market evidence inside that support network from those support team members, where they're consistently getting that kind of feedback that there's some issues that you could help them address.
Yeah, and it seems like, for the most part, it's a really symbiotic, relationship, right? Everybody wins. I mean, do you think Kaylee needs to, worry about any toes that could be stepped on, or do you think that they're gonna be gung-ho for it?
Well, there's two things to look out for. One is just finding a way to capture that information without slowing down the support process. You don't want to force them to go through this menu of 97 things that they have to choose from when they get a support request. You don't want to make it a lot more difficult for them. And so there are actually really good tools out there today that allow you to search through support requests and look for common words and common phrases. So again, you just don't want to make it hard for them to keep customers happy. That's the first thing to be on the lookout for. The second thing, and where you do have to be a little bit careful, is you want to make sure that there is some consistency to the feedback you're getting. You don't want this just be a really terrible support call somebody had from somebody who's just a jerk, and have that be driving what you're doing. And so you want to think about, how do we do this in a way where we're looking for consistency, consistent feedback over the course of a couple of weeks or months, where this one thing keeps coming up, not, oh my gosh, this is the most difficult support call I had, and I want you to do this because I don't ever want to have to talk to that horrible person again. And so that's where you want to be careful, set those expectations, make sure people realize, hey, this is not about the worst support experience you had because somebody was a total jerk. This is about starting to identify what are those things that come up consistently that tell us that something's harder to use than it should be, or that our solution, our product doesn't do something that our users are asking us for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all know that noisy 20% loves to share those opinions.
And there's nothing worse than having to deal with those people who are really, really difficult. We just don't want to build our products just to keep them happy if there's only a few of them.
Yep, makes sense. Kaylee, hopefully that was helpful for you. Clark, I have another one here from Jackie, who asks, what are some good ways to go about estimating a release date, specifically with regards to an agile product?
Ooh, Jackie, that's a big question. So there are a couple of things to think about, though. So just because your development team is using an agile development process, that really should not be the thing that is driving your release dates. And what I mean by that is, just because the code is ready doesn't necessarily mean you're ready to release. And so It is absolutely okay. We are big advocates of the fact that, you know, if you're actually releasing product to the market, make sure that that is really driven by having a completely functioning solution, having what we call saleable product. Just because your dev team has code ready doesn't mean you have to make that code available to your users, which means sometimes you're going to have code in your solution that may be turned off and hidden from the end users until everything is there to allow your user to successfully complete a task. And so that means sometimes the date is driven by product, not by your engineering team, not by your developers. Because there's a lot of different reasons why you would pick a date to release something. Maybe it's because that's when your marketing team is going to be ready to really talk about it. Maybe there's a big industry event coming up, but now it'd be a big virtual industry event right now. Maybe you've got a sales meeting. And so one of the things that we talk about in our build class is making sure that you don't drive release dates around code readiness, but that they're driven around having saleable product, completely usable product that allows your user to accomplish a particular task or that helps you to deliver on a key strategic goal. And so you may need to help kind of rework the way or help people change the way they think about release dates, because we don't want code readiness to be driving those release dates. We really want that to be driven by market needs and by when product and marketing and everybody else is ready to communicate about that code, to help people understand what problem it solves, or to meet the needs of your sales team, or to plan around a big industry event. And so, again, just because your Agile team from a software standpoint has got code that's ready, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily have to release when the code is ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. I mean, we all know when, there's those nightmare stories of when somebody rushes a release or they rush a launch. I mean, do you have any examples of like, some ones that
I have so many examples. I don't even want to talk about it. I've been trying to push them out of my mind. Yes, I do. I'll tell you, and I wish it's been a few years. I don't remember all the details. I just know I remember us having to solve a very specific problem. It was something that was around how people are going to pay for things online. And we had to get a payment solution in the market that would allow people to just do simple online payments that used a combination of credit card and co-op funding. Co-op is what brands provide to their local dealers to support their marketing activities. And so we pushed this out as fast as we could because we needed it by a particular date. I don't remember why. And we left out all of the things that would have made it actually easy to use. It was a nightmare. And we ended up with this stuff. And we had 2 or 3 big releases left on our roadmap. And they were still on our roadmap 6 months later. Because, yeah, we had this very basic online payment capability that we had delivered that allowed you to pay with a combination of credit card and co-op. But we didn't have any of the other stuff that people needed to actually make this work. And what they didn't know was there was a bunch of stuff behind the scenes that we had to build to cobble this together to get it to work as well. So it made our life more difficult because we didn't have the back end really ready. We didn't have the front end ready in a way. For example, we couldn't support ACH. And so if somebody wanted to pay with a check or that kind of a transaction in addition to co-op funds, they couldn't do that. It created more complaints. If we had instead waited for a couple more release cycles and gotten everything built, it would have been so much better. And the challenge was once we solved that basic problem, everybody's like, okay, online payment's done. Let's move on to the next big thing. And it was really hard to get people to go back and say, what about ACH? What about paying with a Discover card? Or what about all the other little things that would have given us a really complete payment solution? Instead, we had one that worked in a very specific situation, but we never went back and fixed it, at least not while I was there. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah, and it's so funny because we were talking internally about, here's a perfect example, right? That went viral was Slack with that DM feature, right? That, pivoting to, fix, and, we had an internal discussion, did they talk to any of their users about it before they set it off? So they're certainly in the news, but I don't know if it's for anything positive at the.
Yeah, I mean, that's rough. And, Slack's done it's become just like the core of how so many companies work. That's just such a huge miss. And understandable. It's easy to understand how stuff like that happens. We've all had things like that happen that we just did not anticipate the impact. We didn't really think it through. We didn't get customer feedback. It's the worst thing in the world to be, at a company like that. I can end up in the news for something like that. That's makes you feel very bad.
Yeah, it's made for lengthy discussions for us internally. So we take it and we learn from it, I suppose, right? Yeah. All right, here is one from Chester who asks, we have been having some issues with a couple of clients who are proving to be increasingly difficult to work with. Our product teams are communicative and over-deliver at every turn. They don't seem to be able to see things big picture, and they want to cut our budgets at every turn. How can I best measure the pros and cons of sticking it out, or when is enough enough?
So I don't know how big Chester's company is, and that in the real world sometimes has a lot to do with how much we put up with from these kinds of customers. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. The first thing, and something that actually helped us when we were small and were struggling with these kinds of conversations, was to think about what are the things that they are asking us for? What are the things that they're unhappy about? And is there something bigger there? Is there something there that represents an issue or a challenge for a bigger part of the market, for a bigger part of our customer base? And so one of the things that we spent a lot of time trying to do is to rethink a lot of those kind of requests and challenges to say, is this just this client? Or is this a bigger issue? Is there a problem here that we could go solve that would address this? So that's kind of the first thing to think about, because sometimes there are just difficult clients. And we did, I know at least 2 examples where we just had to resign a client who was just difficult to work with. And when we made those decisions, there were a couple of key things that pushed us to that point. And the first one was this: was serving this client taking us away from our long-term vision and direction? So were we doing stuff, were they so difficult that they kept us from heading in the direction where we wanted to head as a company? And if the answer to that was yes, then that's when we start thinking about, okay, how do we get rid of this client? How do we stop investing resources in a client who's clearly going off in this direction? We want to go this way. So that was one. And then the second thing was, honestly, you have to think about the kind of mental health of your own team members. If it's becoming disruptive to team members and they just aren't able to do their jobs because they can't keep their client happy, then that's the other situation where you maybe have to really think hard about, is this a client we just can't do business with? Now, if you work for a small company and those are your 2 biggest clients, then the challenge you have is figuring out, how do we start to focus on where we want to go as a company? And you might have to, gut it out for a little while until you can find some new customers. That's the reality that you have to deal with sometimes. In a business situation, you sometimes have to keep working with those difficult customers. But I do still vividly remember when I joined that company. It was a small company. I joined to help them deal with a really, really difficult customer. And the happiest day of my first year there was the day that I talked to that client, and they said, I did a daily status call at 4:00 every day with this customer to explain to them how we were getting through the challenges that we had with them. My happiest day for that first year was when my client contact said, I don't have anything to talk to you about today. Maybe we can go to weekly update calls. And I still remember how great that felt. Now, they were a client who was a great client, and we worked through it. It took us 4 or 5 months of daily status calls to get through it. and they stayed a client for the next 10 years. But the first 3 months were brutal. But if there's no hope of getting past that, then I think you have to figure out, if this is affecting where we want to go as a company, or if it's affecting the mental health of our people, then you have to start having hard conversations about maybe we shouldn't be doing business with these folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to your point, it is really important of, how big it is and to have those hard conversations, right? Because as, for our customers, we don't want to tell them no. And, sometimes you have to. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think trying to figure out what is making this so difficult. Again, in different industries, we had clients that were always extremely cost conscious. And so again, make sure you're not just trading one difficult client for another difficult client. So try to dig into as much of what you know about them, why the relationships are so difficult, and make sure it's not more of a higher level market issue that you can find a way to go solve.
Mm-hmm. Great. For everybody on the call, we have Clark for about another 5 minutes or so. So if you have any questions or follow-ups to anything we've talked about, feel free to toss them into the chat. Here's one more, Clark, that I'm actually interested in your thoughts on. This one comes from Michael, who says he is being tasked with putting together a product management team from scratch. And he has his pick of some existing lower level PMs, PMMs, PMs and PMMs, as well as engineers, sales reps. But who do you think it's best for him to go after? Does he try to teach their engineers how to think product? Or does he roll up his sleeves and, try to mentor sort of these lower level folks in the hope that they make the cut? Where do you think he should sort through on that?
So I've seen people from lots of different places do really well in product management roles. One of the fun things about teaching for Pragmatic is, I teach foundations almost every week, and talk to folks who are product people, engineers who are making that switch, salespeople who are making the transition, project managers who are making the transition. So I don't think there's any one profile to look for, because they all have different things that you're going to have to shore up. When you bring engineers over, we've got to get them thinking beyond, kind of individual product features to thinking bigger picture. When you move salespeople over, you got to get them from thinking about, what do we have to do to close a deal, to thinking about bigger picture. How do we actually start to talk to people and think about problems, not about closing deals? Here's what I would tell you in my experience has been the most consistent thing that has helped me identify the people who were effective in product roles. And it's really kind of boils down to one word, and it's curiosity. Who are those people who wanted to understand what was going on? And I had engineers, as a matter of fact, the guy who runs the entire product organization for the company that I came from was a sales engineer. But he was a sales engineer who always wanted to understand why, who always wanted to figure out what was going on. And he's done an amazing job in his role running product because he was curious. And so part of that means, when I think about curious, it's, people who are comfortable asking questions, who like talking to other people. And again, I don't want to stereotype anybody, but sometimes engineers aren't really comfortable in that role. Sometimes they're not comfortable talking to people. They just want to solve problems. And so look for somebody, whether it's a salesperson, an engineer, a project manager, who's really curious, who wants to talk to people, who wants to figure out, how do they use our solution? Tell me about who wants to understand their business, who wants to understand, what problem your products solve. And so I'm not sure that I would say think about it in terms of what they do today. Look for those people who are really curious, who don't just take something at face value and assume, okay, fine, this is the right answer, we're going to go do this, but who want to really ask that question, why, who want to learn more. And I've seen people come out of engineering, come out of project management, come out of really junior roles. As a matter of fact, again, one of the people the most junior person that I had at the company where I came from, when I got there, ended up being an absolute rock star because she just wanted to figure things out. And she was quiet and right out of college. And I don't know what I would have done without her for 8 years, because she wanted to understand what's going on.
Great. Yeah, I think people with those drives, you know, and also you can mold them. I mean, Amy Graham, she's one of our instructors as well. She headed HR for years, and she says, you know, yeah, that person, to your point, Clark, like those hungry individuals who are curious and who are willing to learn.
Yeah. So, and again, it's really interesting because I never know, like when we teach foundations, I can never tell. Sometimes people who are asked the most questions, who really get into it after class, they'll say, oh yeah, I'm an engineer today and I'm moving into a product role in 3 months. And, you know, I would have had no idea. I would have thought they were somebody who was already in a product role because they're curious. They understand their users and their customers. And so look for those people.
Right. Well, we've hit our time. Clark, thank you so much. You know, now is the best, the best part of the session where you pick your favorite live session. I mean, your favorite live question, obviously.
I only got one. Well,
look, I was going to say, don't sleep on Kim. Kim asked about the newsletter. Kim was
That's true.
She's going to wait for your coupon code.
That's true.
I did offer to get you a sticker.
You did. You're right.
Stickers, right? But no, we could always, shoot Jeff his lunch as well.
I think I got to give Jeff the prize. I appreciate Kim helping me try to get a sticker, but so yeah.
Some good questions though. She's been with us before. She's been a contender. So make sure to bring those with. Come back, Kim. We love having you guys. So these office hours are for you guys. We always say, come late, leave early, whatever you have to do. This time is for you. So. Bring those questions, whether it be advice, clarification, whatever you need. All right, Jeff, well, we will be in touch with your lunch to your favorite restaurant on Pragmatic. In the meantime, Clark, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you spending this time with us. And, we're here every Friday at 1:30 Eastern. I also did want to do a quick plug for our next product chat. This is taking place April 13th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And it's really going to be a star-studded discussion. We have folks from Closed, Center Code, and Product-Led talking about how product professionals can become masters of their competitive landscape. So we're going to dive into common pitfalls to avoid, ways to develop winning strategies, and really how to use that database, database content to really drive decision-making. So we'd love to have you. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful weekend.